So, Vice President Kamala Harris, her husband Doug, became the first ever second gentleman when she became vice president. And come January of 2025, when she's sworn in as the 47th president of the United States, Doug will become the first ever first gentleman. And there's a lot of talk about that. And this next clip I'm going to show you, he's talking about toxic masculinity and how that it's a problem in this country. And I'm going to come back after he gets done with this great clip, and we're going to talk more about this and why that MAGA thinks for some reason that in order to be the man in the room, you have to be the most loud and obnoxious and appear to be rough and tough. So let's let Doug take it away, and then we're going to talk more about it.
Talk about masculinity for a moment. Has being second gentleman changed your own view of perceived gender roles or what it means to be a man?
This is something I've thought about a lot and something I've spoken about a lot. There's too much of toxicity, masculine toxicity out there, and we've kind of confused what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine, where you've got this trope out there that you've got to be tough and angry and lash out to be strong. It's just the opposite. Strength is how you show your love for people. Strength is how you are for people and how you have their back and how you stick up for other people and pushing out against bullies. I mean, that's what I believe it is. So every time I can speak against this toxicity, we're seeing it with our younger people. We're seeing it in our discourse, in our politics, in the media. You're seeing it as it relates to so many of the issues that we're pushing back on. So I think it's a problem, and I'm going to continue to use this platform every time I get to speak out against this toxic masculinity that's out there.
I think we got so much confused in this country about what it means to be a man and what it means to be masculine. I think MAGA, just like they've hijacked the flag and hijacked the Bible, has also hijacked what it means to be a man. And in their world, they think it means stand up and be as cruel and as loud and obnoxious and as unfiltered as you possibly can be. Come off to be tough. And man, it's really bad where I live because I'm in a small town and guys love to ride around in these big jacked up trucks with a pair of testicles hanging off of them and 4 flags flying off every end of it, off every corner of it. And when I see that stuff, I do not see a sign of strength. And when I see a man who is afraid for a woman to be in a position of power, or I see a man who is afraid of a gay or a trans person to be out in the open about it, when I see grown men afraid of women breastfeeding in public, and when I see grown men, worried about their way of life being taken away from them, I do not see that as a sign of strength. I see it as a massive weakness on their behalf. I view them as very fragile when I see them. I don't ever look over at someone like that and go, oh, now that's a guy right there I wouldn't want to mess with. I say to myself, that's a guy right there I would never want to hang around with. That's a guy right there I would never want to have around my children. That's a guy that's got a lot of issues that he needs to work through and iron out. And people like that gravitated toward Donald Trump because he made them feel empowered. They were people who could not win an argument with facts and evidence because they don't have them. They were people who were uneducated, and I'm not trying to be condescending and talk down, but they were just uneducated. And then on top of that, they were misinformed and ill-informed. And they really didn't like it when someone would fact check them real quick and say, hey, what you just said wasn't true. Back when I was growing up, you could go around, you could tell all kinds of bullshit stories. And, I remember back growing up, there were several guys around my hometown that just told a bunch of, tall tales, a lot of tall fishing stories, And when they walked away, we would look at each other and say, yeah, we know they're full of shit. But then there come the point where you could just really do a quick Google search and you could figure out that, hey, what they're saying ain't true. So all of a sudden, these men starts getting fact checked. And instead of taking responsibility for that and saying, hey, I got one wrong, they just double down, dig in their heels, and cry fake news, and they think that makes them look strong, and I disagree. I think it makes them look as weak and fragile as they come. If you can't accept facts and evidence and say to yourself or say to the person that presented it to you, you know what? I didn't know that, and I've done it before. I've had it happen. I've had people say to me, Brando, what you just said wasn't true. Okay, how so? And when they lay the evidence in front of me, I'm like, well, I'm glad you told me that because I don't want to continue to push that around. There are people out there that would look over at me and say, well, he's weak. he's a wimp because he wouldn't, keep doubling down on stuff. But I think you're weak, and I think you're a wimp because you're not man enough to admit when you're wrong. And you're afraid of other people being able to live their life openly. For some reason, that worries you, and you live in fear of that. You're not strong, and you're not manly, and you're not masculine for believing in that. I just do not buy into it. And all the years of playing and all the dive bars that I did, I'll tell you, the one guy in the room that I never worried about. I never worried about the loud, obnoxious drunk who was yelling to the room that he was going to kick everybody's ass. Because 9 out of 10 times, that guy never threw a punch. 9 out of 10 times, 9.999 times, that guy ran like a coward when the first person stood up to him. The guy that I always worried about and said, you know what, I wouldn't mess with that dude if I was you, was the quiet guy that came in, the way he carried himself. He walked into a room, and you knew not to mess with that guy. You just knew it. He didn't have to tell you. He didn't have to brag about it. He didn't have to tell you stories about all the people he'd whipped in his life, because he really didn't have to whip very many of them, because they respected him by the way he carried himself in the room. And so I always looked up to stuff like that. And my grandfather was an old World War II veteran, and he had 3 daughters and a son, my mom, her 2 sisters, and my uncle. And my mom has told me so many stories about how and this is a guy born in 1913, by the way, how that my grandpa would let her sit and braid parts of his hair, and he would sit and braid her hair, and he would let her put fingernail polish on him and things like that. And this was way back then in Southeast Kentucky, and he was one of the strongest men I ever knew, and he never raised his voice at anybody that I heard of. He never took a swing at anybody. He didn't have to, and he wasn't really that big of a guy in stature. But he carried himself in a manner that everybody in town respected him. The whole family respected him. When he walked into a room, the kids would, stand up and let him have their seat, because that's how much they respected him. This toxic masculinity that's out there today, and these guys that are going over the top, scared, thinking they're strong and thinking they're owning liberals and thinking they're in some kind of imaginary fight and they're being persecuted. It's so ridiculous. And what's even more ridiculous to me and so over the top is when these guys act like they're a rebel in East Tennessee for being a Trump supporter. It's like, and then I see some say stuff like, well, I don't care if people like it or not. I ain't saying I'm for him. I ain't saying against him. And then they'll go on to defend someone like a J.D. Vance or a Trump. And I'm like, dude, that's a pretty popular stance to have around here. You can go ahead and say it. You can go ahead and say it right out loud. Everybody's pretty much going to give you a pass for that. They're going to clap for you. People like me is going to sit back and think you're a moron. But for the most part, you can say that out loud. That's not a rebel stance. When you put all these flags on your truck in my part of the world and you ride around with it, what kind of rebel stance is that? You're in the Bible Belt, waving a Bible in the air. It's not the flex you think it is. If you really want to try on a different exercise and you want to feel persecuted, just change your beliefs. Just try it on for size one day. Just take Brando's word for it. Go over to another town where you're not as known, where people don't know who you are, but you're probably not a household name in your own household. But I'm just saying, go over to some place where people don't really know who you are, and just sit down on a bar stool and start mouthing off liberal ideas. Or just get on Facebook or social media and just start sharing anti-Trump stuff in this part of the world and see how far you get. See how many friends you lose, and see how many people are suddenly yelling and screaming at you to the top of their lungs because you said something that made them think. And that's what it boils down to, folks. When you take people out of their comfort zone and you make them think, and they're not capable of thinking, and they don't like to be made to step outside their comfort zone, I'm sorry, that is a sign of weakness. That's not a sign of strength. And all this loud, over-the-top, obnoxious, cruel WWE rhetoric that MAGA does and thinks is cool and thinks is funny and thinks is masculine is not. It's weak. Jimmy Carter was president for 4 years. He never fired a shot while he was president. There's been a whole lot of people that said that he was a weak president. He was weak on the military. He was weak on. Well, if he was able to sit down and talk and negotiate with people without firing a shot, that is what makes you strong. That's a sign of a strong leader, not somebody that has to go out there and wreak a bunch of havoc because they're doing so because they're weak. Anytime you see these people out here waving these flags and flexing their chest and driving around with a truck with a pair of nuts hanging off of it, they're the weakest, most fragile dude in the room. They can't walk past a gay nutcracker in a Target that they don't lose their mind at Christmas time. That's who you're dealing with. They can't look at a Starbucks coffee cup without losing their mind. They can't catch wind that a transgender got a beer can from Bud Light that they don't just go completely crazy. And the fact that they don't want black athletes speaking up, or they don't want women to have a position of power, or they don't want gay or trans people to be open about who they are, it's a sign of weakness and it's cowardice in my mind. And actually, I really don't think that's an opinion. I'll just be brutally honest with you. I think it's a cold, hard fact of life that a lot of people who thinks they're manly and thinks they're masculine needs to really stop and wake up and realize you're not the strongest dude in the room. And the strongest men in the room view you as weak because they know they can beat you. They know you're the most easily beatable person in the room. So have fun with that.